Will our oceans survive the pressures that we as humans place upon it? More and more, many humans believe the prospects of the oceans and the blue economy provides the answers to the challenges that confront us. Yet food security, blue biotechnology, tourism, marine renewable energy and cosmetics, aquaculture, fisheries, coastal processes, ports, logistics, entire supply chains, seafarers, research, education and training, entire coastal livelihoods, and even the presence of the ecosystems, beaches, and many resources that we ultimately take for granted depends on these marine resources. Yet, these resources place unprecedented pressure from global human population, climate change uncertainty, marine pollution, and the greater threat of fisheries and related social, human, ecological, and other crimes. This may not be the first podcast to consider the catastrophe of illegal, underreported, unregulated fisheries. However, it does tend to ask us, what can we do about it, and how can we move to solve this great tragedy of our times? In episode 2 on how to save the planet and create our ultimate future, the topic has never been timelier, as many nations, regions and organizations are starting to formulate their approaches to the global blue economy strategies, finally looking for an answer to our oceans and our causes. The global seafood industry is starting to face pressure from NGOs, media such as the recent Sea Conspiracy film, Outlaw Oceans book, and from consumers to become far more transparent and accountable. Food is no longer regarded as something we just eat. Policymakers have most recently been negotiating the UN Sustainable Development Goal 14.4 to finally abolish all forms of fishery subsidies and indirect financial support to the topic. Entrepreneurs are providing unprecedented technological and other innovations. More and more entities are cooperating. Others are planning to commit at least 30% of the oceans to marine protected areas with varying levels of protection against this global menace. And, however, to understand this curse of IUU fisheries, it is necessary to delve below the surface, to understand what are the policies, the risks, the uncertainty, to try and quantify the costs, to try and understand the impact on what each and every one of us might mean for us. And most of all, more fundamentally, what can we actually do about it? How can we save the planet and create our own future? Our planet and its prosperity, or its impending doom and its salvation, collapsing resources ultimately lie within the fate of humanity. While some are turning to space and others radical climate change solutions such as afforestation, geoengineering, carbon capture and storage, direct air capture, and others covered in recent research, more and more are turning to the oceans. It's increasingly portrayed as a never-ending source of bountiful wealth from its fisheries, its potential for tourism, wind, waves, currents, and other energy, perpetual desalination, marine tourism, and other resources that can save us. Yet, humanity in its unquesting search to extract as much from the oceans has even targeted non-living, unsustainable marine minerals such as seabed mining, which take millions of years to form. However, our greatest value and most underappreciated includes our fisheries and our aquaculture. But these are among the greatest risks of global collapse and decay. And so in this presentation, I'll be speaking about the great risks that we face. I'll be giving an overview of the policies, the studies, case study successes, the failures, why we should act in favor of this motion, what are the risks and disadvantages if we don't act against this motion, what are the different kinds of solutions can we find to resolve it, whether it's legal, technology, trying to change human behavior and motivation, whether it's protecting them in reserves and finding tourism solutions. Is it financial, such as the recent subsidies, or is it the effort to try and get as many consumers interested as possible? And considering all of these solutions, it's possible for us to act immediately to prioritize marine ecological restoration and these other solutions enabling species to recover. We can overcome the tragic collapse of our fisheries and ensure that all marine species survive for future generations if we take this issue seriously enough and significantly, passionately commit to us. It is in our own self-interest to do so, not just for future generations, but for our own, as without it and our actions, or other threats to marine ecosystems, to climate change, to the great uncertainty of our future, will be to no avail. We might as well just give up and abdicate and witness the last sunsets and presence of fisheries and species on our planet. The artificial seafood that we have for a mere handful of years. This last decade that we live in, 2020, is our one remaining chance as a species to salvage anything at all, and as well as to form this future for generations. As I've previously said, as I said in my first introduction to the global blue economy, in the most recent podcast, the global blue economy is our attempt to try and come up with a sustainable basis upon which to treat our oceans. Having raped our oceans, having raped our land, we are extremely reliant upon trying to do our best to preserve the ocean as a source of food, security, and other resources. The ecosystems that can save us, the energy, boundless, perpetual clean energy, and other resources. At the moment, we really need to do something about an industry that costs at a minimum over 17 to 30 billion US dollars each year, and the fact that more plastic currently exists in the world than species. Yet climate change is not just another problem. Illegal fisheries is just but one of many challenges to the global blue economy upon which I'll be focusing in my podcasts on in the next series of weeks. Whether it's global climate change, natural disasters, pollution, sea level rise, natural disasters, and other threats, most fundamentally of all, the risks that we should be really concerned about include those of illegal, unregulated, and underreported fisheries, because they lead to even greater risks, such as those of species extinction, migration, biodiversity. And with so many people dependent on fisheries, this will be among the greatest crimes. Then, of course, if we fail to do anything about it, if we continue to remain apathetic or just allow our population to grow uncontrolled and the pressure on the resources unsustainably, then we face the real grave world that these resources will not last. So, some recent developments in the global IUU fisheries arena. These developments include that most recently 14 global leaders were among the first to pledge publicly to committing 30% of their land and oceans by sea, to protect 30% of their oceans and land by 2030. Since then, more than 30 other countries have joined them. There's an increasing number have recognized that there is a core problem. They've also realized it has also been calculated by the Food and Agricultural Organization Global Fishing Watch and many charities such as Greenpeace and so on, that over $35 to $45 billion each year is lost in illegal fisheries. This excludes the excess capacity that is designed to do artificially cheap oceans. But just because these things result in your artificially cheap £1, $1 tin of tuna does not underline the other hidden costs that are behind this industry, and the fact that these illegal fisheries and other activities are causing unprecedented damage to our oceans, and the fact that we might very well be the last generation, apart from a handful of rich people, to do something unless we change our minds. The costs, there are many costs, as this presentation will show, and reasons to act. Without fisheries, their support will be hard-pressed to support the currently over 4 billion people who depend on fisheries, or over 8 billion people doing upon it. It's a whole industry which depends upon it, and with this industry has led to unprecedented damage and destruction for ecosystems. It's caused huge damage to society. It has caused even greater risks of immigration, migrants, slavery, harassment, sexual enslavement, and other torturing, violation of rights, all just for artificial species. Acting upon this will help rid us of a huge human scourge upon the earth, a blot of human enslavement and poverty. Acting against it will ensure that our species survive for future generations, that we do have a chance to secure food, and that we can get the cosmetics, biomaterials, and resources that are necessary to help save our planet. So what is illegal, unregulated, and underreported fisheries? Illegal fishery is basically any activity that does not directly have state-sanctioned legitimate seal of approval. And by state, we extend this to mean international law, customary law, and domestic recognition or law. It is shadow state or activities that occur underregulated and unbeholden to everybody. And history has shown that when these sectors are not regulated, we have the damage of mare liberum, or the tragedy of the global commons, where everybody selfishly fishes for their own usage most of the time, and there is no thought or heed to scientifically or ecological sustainability, irrespective of these conditions, nor does it allow for the survival economically or socially. Underreported fisheries or unreported fisheries has its own problems of those that cause violations against law. Then there's unregulated activity which happens beyond control. These damages have control because traditionally these were within the role of the individual fishing vessel or the individual government. I would just like to pause to say that these definitions have current problems because they absolve us all of the responsibility. Each and every one of us, if we support this, whether knowingly or unknowingly, directly or indirectly, should be held accountable for this grave crime that is continuously being perpetuated. This means that all of us, from the producers right through to the shipping, the retailers, the wholesalers, the restaurants, the people financing it, the governments and policymakers, the insurance industry, and of course each and every individual or business that knowingly or unknowingly does so. And we also have to improve access to the information about those who are committing such atrocities, violations of their past, records of success and failure. We only have to look at the recent example of what can go wrong with illegal fisheries. Illegal fishing vessels have a poor safety, health and hygiene record. They have poor conditions, most notably in the Southeast Asian condition of human labour rights abuses. They have caused huge problems of enforcement costs and significant loss of damages to countries in West Africa, the Caribbean and the Pacific, who particularly depend on these for occupying up to 70, 80, 90% of their economies. And it is a grave source of peril for the price of these live seafood markets and deaths, leading to countless shipwrecks and other unprecedented damage. So what are the most important policies out there? This is not a legal treatise. These examples of legal policy and regulations show that there are plenty of plans out there, but as we know, any plan or policy that is out there is only so good as it has been ratified or applied to by many nations. The whole illegal fishing industry violates those such as the Antarctic Treaty, MARPOL, RAMSAR and CITES, as well as the Convention on Biological Diversity, in efforts to protect marine species from all sorts of damage. There are also responsibilities that nations have committed to actually undertaking legal action under 1995 and 2000 codes. And then, of course, there's the subsidiary crimes that it leads to, such as piracy, robbery, bribery, theft, corruption, whaling, damage, and other harms to species and bycatch and other damage. It may also interest you to know that most of the efforts to deter illegal fisheries are several decades out of date. Most notably, we're looking at the 1995 FAA Code for Responsible Fisheries, the 2000 FAA International Plan of Action to Prevent, Deter and Eliminate Illegal Fisheries, and the 1995 UN Fish Stock, and the 2009 FAA Port State Measures Agreement, which imposes measures for ports to act. All these measures are significantly out of date and need significant revising in view of recent technology, changes in international maritime law, changes in policies, approaches, cooperation, and even states and regulations. So it's clear, and it is hoped that with the passing of a new UN High Seas Treaty, which has been ratified this year, and revised revisions on the World Trade Organization to eliminate illegal fisheries, that these measures will stop. Basically, there are a number of core flaws with current policies and legislation. These, as I've stated before, hopefully these will be resolved in new legislation. Species are meant to be managed responsibly, scientifically, and have cooperation in the pursuit of justice. However, there's too much dependency on state action and not enough responsibility applied to individual vessels, supply chains, organizations, individuals, ports, and so on to actually act against the scourge even when they witness and see it around them. There is also no responsibility or commitment to undertake such action, nor pressing policies and censure, fines, penalties, sanctions, and so forth against those who do not act in their sustainable, responsible manner of protecting their fisheries, or transboundary fisheries escaping between species. Too much dependency is left on individual law, with huge swathes of the ocean unprotected, and very selective and individual law in many countries being poorly financed, enforced, resourced, or undertaken. Regionally, many of the world's responsibilities depend on either a particular area or species. Most notably, the IATTC, ICAT, IWC, IOTC, and so on mostly depend on and the Fisheries Forum Agency and other entities mainly primarily dominate with tuna or focus on whales or other species. Others are regional specific, such as CCMR for the Antarctic, the Southeast Atlantic Fishery Organization, North Atlantic Fisheries Organization, South Pacific Regional Fisheries Management Organization, and so forth. And several of these have gaps in terms of whether they act against fishery vessels transshipment, merely just changing from one illegal fishery to another to circumvent the practice, or whether compelling ports, individuals, or anybody else to act. Also, with the proliferation of too many policies, organizations, and plans, means that it can be really tricky to obtain a centralized approach to sharing information and data on criminals and those committing such violated crimes. There's also challenges in ensuring enforcement and action and who is actually taking responsibility. These are just a few handful examples of specific measures against fisheries that individual nations have taken up. Some, such as Costa Rica, have targeted certain species such as conch, lobster, mussels, clams, and sharks. Others, such as South Africa with its Marine Living and Resources Management Act, or the Iceland Fisheries Act and Canadian Coastal Fisheries Management Act, have taken a more national approach across all fisheries, or such in the case of the USA, have extended their reach to help support and cooperate between those Pacific and other Pacific and Caribbean nations who cannot individually support their own fishery initiatives, but are willing to partner with nations such as the US to work actively to pool resources and have a common cause. In my previous research, I have noticed that there's a number of core problems with existing legal frameworks against illegal fisheries. Most legislation is significantly outdated and does not have a comprehensive approach. Therefore, I have proposed a number of core solutions and approaches into how to deal with this problem. Therefore, it is incredibly important to consider, first of all, that these species will survive for the long run. That ensures that we need to consider rewilding, sustainable, ecosystem-based and scientific approaches, which takes into account different people's needs and requirements through marine spatial planning, which enables species to recover in the ecosystems with mean ecological capital and recovery, and has proper measures to act proactively against any particular risks or threats such as pollution, climate change, human behavior or action or lack of action that just threatens the long-term or short-term survival of these fisheries. Therefore, legislation is only as good as it's having a properly equipped, resourced, trained, staffed and system of enforcement authority and information, including one that reacts and liaises with the public, which has the full autonomy and decentralized power and capacity to implement any action or regulation that it might need. It also needs to be able to consider any threats or risks, whether managed, to operate, maintain, and deal with those responsibilities. It is also important that it is able to sufficiently update information, make use of the most up-to-date technology, take care of risks that not happen only within its regions, but can actively cooperate with neighboring countries, states, realms, or organizations in order to minimize common communal transboundary risks. It is also important to pay cognizance to stakeholder requirements and usages, including protecting cultural heritage, and make sure that if any activity is planned for the area which is within a sustainable fisheries management area or marine reserve, is sufficiently protected by a full geophysical, social, economic, cultural, environmental, or other legislation to protect such a measure. It's the only way that these will survive. It is impossible to give a full detailed account of every legislation policy that happens. For example, but there are a number of core successes that we can take heart from. Most notably is the global efforts such as Oceania and Greenpeace, Sea Shepherd, and more active measures to take efforts against illegal fisheries internationally, such as the Stop Fishing campaign. In South Africa, SASI and MS, along with the MSC standards or certifications, are measures designed to try and educate consumers into which are the most sustainable and less sustainable forms of seafood that it is safe for them to responsibly consume. There have also been notable successes in West and East Africa, where cooperation and support with NGOs and entities such as Greenpeace, along with the various navies such as the US and others, have managed to successfully rapidly reduce the illegal fisheries and the huge economic damage that they have caused over several years to such measures. Tanzania also and Mozambique also had recent success in these measures. Bangladesh have chosen a different approach, where they have also helped to come up with sustainable, resilient livelihoods which try and reduce pressure on illegal fisheries and try and give fishermen grants or alternative income as a bribe or incentive to actually act against it, including giving them food sources and encouraging cooperation. Unfortunately, it also brings me with great sorrow to mention the particular failures of certain areas that have not had such a remarkable success. Most notably, there have been huge problems of illegal fisheries in West Africa, which have had huge gaps in the whole framework of getting individual ports and areas to cooperate. In Ghana, there has been huge damage of over 10 million euros each year for over 16 years, along with other problems such as chemicals, explosives, and dynamics models for the SECO trade, which have caused huge damage of up to $50 to $80 million and problems causes. And despite sanctions for Ghana, or those include purple lists such as St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the Caribbean, despite all these pressures, it has not been sufficient to curb the huge damage and loss to the legitimate government revenue, or, more concernedly, to the millions of livelihoods of community and artisanal fisheries that ultimately depend on having these species survive for their own income. South Africa too also has had particular problems with abalone, crayfish, and other poaching. This has included problems with poor enforcement and authorities, a lack of specialized environmental poaching courts, lack of taking it seriously, as with many countries in the judicial system, as it is considered a relatively blameless crime, irrespective of the human cost. Also equally concernedly is in Europe, where despite fisheries surviving for over 3,000 years, there have been numerous problems, such as with the king cod scallops in 2021, a month ago, to the cod war, to the collapsing fisheries of cod and others, to be really concerned about survival in Europe or across Southeast Asia and Oceania, with damage in China, Japan, South Korea, North Korea, Taiwan, and others. It is hard to provide an exact true cost of just how much damage illegal, underreported, and under-regulated fisheries has caused us. As early as 2009, it was estimated to cost $9 to $24 billion a year. Now the costs exceed over $65 billion. These are not insignificant figures. Over 34% of our fisheries are over-collapsed, and yet this is not something to be taken lightly, as many countries such as the Republics of Palau, the Federated States of Micronesia, the Cook Islands, and others depend up to 90% of their resources. It is their biggest commodity that contributes the most significant to their budgets, with the exception of tourism. And with the onslaught of tourism being steadily depleted due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this places even more pressure on incumbents on fisheries to help people survive and eat. It is estimated at a minimum that up to 20% of all fisheries are lost. Over 72 million people have lost access to their things. And the problem is that we just know that this is only scratching on the surface. We don't really know how much the true cost is, because there is no centralized approach. There is no individual government response. There's no single government or UN authority or anybody else that has truly come up with a standard method of working out just how much illegal fisheries is costing us. There remains the argument and the challenges of cooperation and enforcement to ensure whether we get people to directly report it from below and get communities, individuals, fishermen, markets, retailers, wholesalers to report it, or whether we can rely on governments alone to provide an honest slot. All we know that over time, certain areas are becoming more and more risk, particularly the East Indian Ocean and the Northwest Pacific are now dominating, along with the West and Central Pacific, as becoming an increasingly higher proportion of the global areas of costs. Over time, this has shifted away from the Northeast Pacific and the Northwest Atlantic, but more concernedly has been the increase in even supposedly protected areas such as the Antarctic. Then of course there's the even greater concern that up to 800%, up to 100% obviously of the species within the Antarctic are illegal because marine species should not be protected over there, and the fact that the illegal fisheries could cost up to $3 trillion in the Northwest Pacific, $3 billion in the North Pacific, $1.56 billion or more in the Western Central Pacific. It is even more greater concern that just in the last 40 years alone, that fisheries have become overfished from around over 60% to over 93%. And unless we convert to aquaculture like the Chinese propose we're doing, we have even greater problems to deal with. The problem with trying to act against illegal fisheries is that you cannot take action against vessels by merely reporting them to their nations, such as the nature of vessel ownership. They look to countries such as Liberia, Marshall Islands, and Panama, which are even more opaque over who actually owns it and are even laxer in their responsibility to act upon it. Each of the regional fisheries organizations has their own problems. There's very little oversight in many areas, and it is all too easy to slip out of it with either through bribes or threatening or not even having an observer on board the vessel, to actually merely transferring any vessel suspected of any cargo suspected of being illegally obtained from one vessel to another via transshipment. Unfortunately, the UN or governments do not actually take responsibility, despite the noble efforts of those such as Global Sky Truth, Global Fishing Watch, or various ocean data platforms such as the one recently introduced by the World Resource Institute. China has over 17,000 vessels, and they're getting more and more prolific. Nations such as China have also been heavily involved in constructing or occupying even more small harbours and larger commercial harbours upon which to scale their fisheries. This is despite a pronouncement by China, noted when I was actually there in China, that they were pledging to commit up to 100% of their fisheries would be obtained from aquaculture, which is still a worthy target, but still a while to go. There are incalculable benefits from acting against illegal fisheries, as any presentation will show. Illegal fisheries not only threatens legitimate trade, exports, trade revenue, taxes, customs duties, scarce foreign exchange and others, especially to those nations which have very little else to trade. And we're not just extending this to fisheries, but to all sorts of marine resources such as seaweed and the blue carbon that can act against it, to the products such as blue biotechnology and cosmetics, pharmaceuticals and other high-value products that could be obtained, to other incredibly valuable resources such as the survival of the reefs and species that are needed for tourism and other hardcore threats. And the problem is that without this damage, that if we cut illegal fisheries by 50%, we could more than double global fishery match. We could change it from a loss of over $5.3 billion that is lost, or tens of billions of dollars that are lost to local economies, and secure over $50 billion more in profit to aid legitimate businesses and trade. It is a hugely profitable enterprise, illegal fisheries. That's excluding the over $1 billion that Africa has lost from fisheries. A single company has received just one, it's really hard to act. A single company such as Vidal Pego in Spain received over $13.3 million from official government subsidies despite illegal fisheries. And that is why the problems of acting against illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing subsidies is so important to support the cause. This is why it is important to ban and enforce action against single species such as shark fins. Illegal sharks cause far more value, and the jobs and everything else that depends on them cause far more value than alive than to benefit a handful of businesses. We've already spoken about the cost of how much governments are costing of illegal subsidies each year. If we do not act, ecosystems collapse and we will have no more fish left for the future. Another problem is that international law is so weak. The subsidy fines are really low, the penalties are really low, and there's very little chance of being intercepted, and many are prepared to take the gamble given that high profits that remain. Even when you're caught, there's very little chance that you'll get caught again, and without measures that are standardized, without cooperation across supply chains, ports, nations, flag states, and other measures, when the bribes and penalties are so low and it has become so easy to bribe people. Other crimes and failures to act include corruption, bribery, sexual enslavement, migrants, human trafficking, problems of drugs, weapons, and other things which are hidden underneath fisheries, because where one crime goes, others follow. And there's the poor safety records, the pollution, the health, the safety, the risks, the hygiene quality, because these people generally cut corners and do things poorly. And there's the high damage that these illegitimate things cause to many species which just die as bycatch without any waste. And until we insist upon full transparency, until we decide to make the fishing sector more accountable, transparent, traceable, and clear, these crimes will carry on. Then there are the other problems that illegal fisheries cause, apart from the huge human cost. There's the great problem of allowing this greed, this selfishness, and this recognition to continue. There's the loss of problems to human damage, dignity, and the enslavement that is continuing. There's the ethics and concern to human species. There's the physical health and damage consequences. There's the sheer problems that this causes for the loss of law, responsibility, and problems. There's the loss of the survival of the species and the poaching themselves. And the fact that if we do not act, we will either lose our fisheries, marine ecosystems, and the species, and the high value products, and so on, and tourism benefits, and so on that follow from these, or alternatively, if we allow these things to continue, other threats such as marine pollution, climate change, coastal damage, and so forth will cause even more people to want to go into illegal fisheries and poacheries, which will cause even more damage, and we'll be in this vicious cycle. It's also possible that this might cause tremendous collapse and damage. In the 1970s, Britain and Iceland fought the unofficial Cod Wars, protesting over fishery rights. France and England more recently have resorted to huge threats, including cutting electricity to the Channel Islands, just to show over Brexit negotiations, where France has had measures of employing illegal measures to scoop up illegally and suck up and drag bottom trawling measures to wipe out the fisheries of the Channel Islands, with among many of its a number of its fishing fleet. IE fisheries threaten over $400 billion of legitimate trade. We're talking not only that, but denying a market through your artificially cheap quota, not just to legitimate fisheries, but over $250 billion of aquaculture. Because we can have an alternative. Aquaculture can provide many alternatives to illegal fisheries. It can provide a huge measure of food security, But if we allow illegal fisheries to continue, we deny the chance both from the legitimate, sustainable, responsible fisheries and organisations and individuals and businesses, but also from aquaculture, which is an even better alternative. But not all is doom and gloom. There are solutions, and there is hope. In this final part of my presentation, I'll be looking at some of the things that people are doing to actually act against this illegal fisheries. There is taking measures to strengthen law and enforcement. There's technological innovation and solution. There's hoping to change human behavior and mindset. There's hoping to improve information systems, training, education, to deal with the financial disincentives or subsidies that prop up these illegal fishing fleets, to improve the fines and penalties of anybody thinking to go into this phase, or to encourage consumers to take and producers to directly ask about the origins of their seafood and other marine species that they depend upon, and wherever possible to use their considerable consumer power and clout to actually work against it. Alternatively, aquaculture can provide an alternative food source, and ecotourism, marine protected areas, can allow species to recover and give us an alternative bet. As I said before, there are many problems with current laws and enforcements, and I will not read all these slides, but just to go and show you that there's a problem of a lack of a global coordinated approach, a lack of sufficiently strong penalties and incentives, a lack of extending the legal problems to supply chains, and a lack of sufficiently strong sources of information and data. And we need to make sure that it is everybody's responsibility, including the offshore oil and gas, renewable energy sector, cruise ships, every yacht, every ferry, every individual person in a boat can be actively reported to monitor, report, act, and fight against this by keeping an eye on any fisheries that's going on. As part of my work for the World Ocean Council, involving in the private sector, and my previous consulting experience on illegal fisheries, I became actively encouraged by the fact that there are many digital innovative solutions out there. In fact, part of my podcast, the reasons for this podcast, is to notify everybody about them. These solutions include, but not include notions such as AI or open data information platforms where you can report, monitor, and keep an eye on illegal fisheries, such as SkyTruth, Google Earth Outreach, and Global Fishing Watch platform. Then, of course, there's AI drones and other data solutions, such as Atlan Space, Open Ocean Robotics, Robocots, Seapicket, and other solutions. There's also measures designed to try and discourage species from actually going and getting poached, such as the shark safe barrier, or alternatively, there are measures to ensure that electronic logbooks so that you can keep a better eye on of people monitoring their catches, their locations and species in real time, as opposed to the past where we were relying on previous data. There are a number of digital solution approaches which can, as I said, use drones, satellite, surveillance, online technology, monitoring systems, and so forth, and these can be made compulsory and act very diligently. Of course, it is equally important to change human mind, human behavior, and human action. It is really important that we have to change the mindset to not think that so that criminals themselves don't believe that they can get away with it. We also need to encourage them to show that they are not alone, and that is really important to name and shame and make sure that this crime is socially unacceptable, and anybody who has any whiff of anything illegal or dodgy can report it, can shame it on social media, can upload it into one of these digital platforms, and can most of all do something about it. And there are many ways to do so. This taking account into consumer responsibility includes many measures such as demanding upon supply chains that their seafood is actually traceable, to actually reporting and monitoring any instances of dodgy behavior from these illegal poachers via initiatives such as South Africa's Abelobi or Canada's Trade Modo platform, where you can actually, or SEDNO OL Trace, where you can actually physically see where your food has come from, and each person in the supply chain is bound by a digital platform. Then there's the fact about acting actively against phasing out the fact that many governments are directly over-promoting these fishing fleets with vessels and so forth, instead of just looking for alternative career paths, behaviors, or encouraging marine reserves or other solutions such as diversifying livelihoods. They do not encourage people to train. All they do is make fishing fleet prices too artificially low for people to continue to have a decent living wage, and all for the sake of making sure that your tuna costs very little. Of course, there are other initiatives such as improving training, education, relying on social media and other efforts. I also want to punt my efforts such as Sustainable Ocean Alliance, which have also been involved in, and our attempts to help support a global Blue New Deal for the youth. This is a youth drafted initiative which actively causes, which has had hundreds of consultations and inputs from youth across the world, and countless thousands of supporters and views, which actively calls to promote sustainable fisheries, to act against illegal fisheries, and to phase out subsidies. Then, of course, there's the need to promote relationships, networking, and other support. Also, there is a need for more marine protected areas, which can be funded by the very subsidies that are willing to boast. There is far greater value to be obtained than from illegal fisheries through legitimate fisheries, through aquaculture, tourism, support in rewilding and blue carbon initiatives, and other solutions against climate change, promoting sustainable fisheries and others. It has also been proven through artificial reefs, cell and lab-grown fish, aquaculture-generated fish, rewilding solutions, and sustainable investments that we do not need illegal fisheries to continue to prop up this trade. We can quite clearly look at many of the examples from St. Helena, Canada, Tristan da Cunha, Galapagos, and so on to show that you can act against illegal fisheries and have really successful marine protected areas. In conclusion, just want to say that there is hope, that we can actually do something about it. When I was in China back in 2019, they told me that they wanted to make sure that 70 to 80% of their current fisheries comes from aquaculture. But given its population, they are really trying hard, so they claim, to get 100% of their fisheries. Most recently, they arrested over 7,000 illegal fisheries. The UK and France have created, and a number of other countries have created, giant marine protected areas, inspired by nations such as the Cook Islands and Palau, which protected over 80% of their oceans and space. And then there's improvements in the recent digitalized technologies. But we must take into account that ultimately, if we do not act, there is this grave problem. What I really am concerned about is the huge cost to the livelihoods of many legitimate people and human beings. We do not know what the collapse of ecosystems, cultural heritages, our entire oceans and future will do to the survival of all species, and whether we have a chance to lead hope. We have to ask ourselves, what can we actually do moving forward? To overcome the tragic collapse of our ocean commons, we will clearly need to act against the scourge of illegal, unreported, underregulated fisheries. It is clearly a disruptive presence that threatens the very survival of our marine ecosystems, maritime supply chains, industries, communities, heritage, food security, the survival and prosperity of too many people. Although many nations are striving to convert the world into a sea of blue economies' sustainable future, with viable long-term growth and optimal welfare, prosperity and peace, nations from Liberia to South Africa to Caribbean to Portugal, the UK, Fiji, Vanuatu, Samoa, Palau and the Cook Islands, this cannot happen if the very basis of marine resources which these all nations depend upon have no chances to survive. And above all else, we must remember that whether it's through the technology, whether it's through reaching out and supporting SOA, Global Fishing Watch and others, whether it's working to ban the huge cost of illegal fisheries and others, whether it's the fact that we need to insist on traceability, report violations and fraud, we need to petition for change and do our best as consumers and producers to support this initiative. We have to do our best not only to act for ourselves but to encourage others. Ultimately, it all depends upon each of us, on how much we as individuals, businesses, policymakers and species really do care about the oceans and our world. If we really wish to flourish, enjoying golden prosperity, abundance of marine species, cultural heritage, enjoying seafood, plants, the biotechnology, energy, blue carbon, the coral reefs, the beaches, the cosmetics, technologies, materials and food cells, in fact any form of life itself, then we should be fighting to save it. Our fisheries have been scientifically proven to be mostly overfished, with many species immediately threatening with extinction or close to it. As many of my previous initiatives have shown, the blue economy can definitely save us. It is the salvation to many of our problems, but only if we continue to act immediately to prioritize action against it. Illegal, underreported, unregulated fisheries will only obliterate whatever is left of our oceans, if no serious attempt is made to rein in and reverse chronological human overpopulation and resource pressure growth, the conflict, the carnage, the onslaught of global climate change and choking pollution as residual detritus. This podcast hopes to show why we need to do something about illegal fisheries, how we can overcome the tragic collapse of our oceans, not just to ensure that we just give up, but we have a chance at reimagining and fabricating the very future that we do want, but also to save any trace of what we do have. We have to ask ourselves, is the artificially cheap price of a tin of supermarket tuna really worth it? Do you really want for sustainable, is it really worth the human bloodstained costs of violated rights and depriving ourselves, never mind future generations, of any related fishery benefits in the future? The choice is to become conscious and to seize the COVID-19 pandemic and soaring interest in the blue economy, along with unprecedented innovations as solutions to our fisheries, remains with us. It also remains with us and up to us to decide how we want to live and on which planet we want as our future to survive upon, with or without oceans, with or without the fisheries within them, or whether we should encourage others to do the same. Or do we just try and live in ignorant bliss, praying the problem may simply vanish? It will not, without us all. There can be no denying that these are unprecedented times in our planet's history. And if there's one thing we have learned, it's not to take the world for granted any longer. We are this close to losing everything that we hold most dear. And the planet has given us a reality check. Whether it's increasing climate change related disruption risks from the wildfires sweeping across Turkey, Canada, America and the Mediterranean, whether it's extreme climate change storms in the Pacific, flooding in the UK and Germany, and all waves of unprecedented challenges, such as the collapsing of many ecosystems and the threatened collapse of the Gulf Stream current. Whether it's surging continent-sized islands of giant plastic floating waste and pollution, oil spills, or former tropical paradises such as Mauritius, whether it's food instability, civil unrest, wars, anarchy, strife, disruption, huge swathes of migrants deciding to flee what they seek for sanctuary, whether it's the disruption caused by these and many other events that is causing us to face challenges and many of us to despair, whether it's the uncertainty from the lingering COVID pandemic, technological uncertainty, economic recessions, social instability, religious fundamentalism, and other problems that the world might face. It can be no denying that these may seem like really dark times. But there is a way out. There is a solution. Time does not have to run out if we ourselves are prepared to do whatever it takes to find our way out about it. And more, there are a number of those of us who have found ways out, who are believing in it, and are looking to spread the message and trying to encourage and inspire more people and to get as much into it as possible. Therefore, in these subsequent webinars, will be looking to showcase some of the solutions and hopes and opportunities that are out there in the world today. For there is a new path and new way out of this future if we ourselves can seek to do something about it. And I challenge us all to look deep into what matters. More and more, the world is turning towards the oceans as our potential saviors, to the marine or blue economy sector as a potential to solve us. More and more, there are others looking at rewilding the oceans and ecosystems, restoring our planet, and doing unprecedented moves in climate change, adaptation, resilience, migration, and other solutions, or the waste circular economy, or space, or other innovations and technologies. And it is my honor and my privilege to try and show you some of these movements in the upcoming series of webinars if you seek to be of interest. For those of you who may be wondering who I am, my name is Dr. Jack Dyer, founder of Blue Economy Future, which is a movement in awareness, as well as a consulting firm devoted to not just taking talk, but for talk is cheap, but doing whatever it can to strive into making implementation. And as part of this, I have been privileged to encounter many different strategies and approaches. I have honors in economics, a master's in the maritime economics from Africa, and a PhD in the South Pacific from Blue Economies and Climate Change. I have created a LinkedIn profile, Dr. Jack Dyer, Blue Economy Future SA, and a website, http://www.blueeconomyfuture.org.za. But I'm also looking to expand to YouTube and other interesting channels to show what the opportunities are for so forth. And so I will move on to my first webinar presentation to shout out to the world to show you what's going on. But I'm here to say that there will be more, and please feel free to get in touch, to keep on dreaming, to hope, and to realize that even though it may just seem that the politicians are talking and that there may seem little hope out there, but to remember never to give up, because there are solutions out there. We just not only need to be aware of them and to find them, but also to help support and believe and dream in whatever way we can. Thank you.